In some problems, we use the letters E and S as our variables, where E represents how many you end with, and S represents how many you start with. In these problems, we need to figure out where to put E and S before we can work each problem. In problem A, Mary found $8. 8 tells me how many more or less, so that's my first small number. I can reread my sentence without that number 8. Mary found dollars. If Mary found dollars, she ends with more dollars. If she ends with more dollars, E must be my big number, and S must be my small number. In the next problem, John lost 15 pencils. Again, 15 tells me how many more or less, so that's my first small number. I'll reread the sentence without that number. John lost pencils. If John lost pencils, he ends with fewer pencils. If John ends with fewer pencils, E must be my small number because he ends with less. In problem C, Roberto made 23 cards. Again, I first circle the number that tells how many more or less, 23. Roberto made cards. If Roberto made cards, he ends with more cards. If he ends with more cards, he must end with a bigger number. So E is my big number, and S is my small number. In the last problem, Carly sold 7 bikes. 7 tells me how many more or less. Then I read it without that number. Carly sold bikes. If Carly sold bikes, she ends with fewer bikes or less bikes. If Carly ends with a lesser number of bikes, Carly ends with a smaller number. So E must be small, and S, for start, must be big. After we're familiar with using E and S, we can use those variables to help solve problems. Let's take a look at this problem. Ron had 43 books. He gave away 12 books. How many books did Ron end up with? First, I need to find the number that tells how many more or how many less. Ron had 43 books. That tells me how many he started with, so I'll move on to the next sentence. He gave away 12 books. If he gave away books, that tells me how many fewer books or how many less. So 12 is my first small number. Now we need to figure out where E and S go on the arrow. He gave away books. If Ron gave away books, he ends up with fewer books. So E must be small, and S must be big. Next, I need to reread the problem to figure out what E or S is. Ron had 43 books. I could also say Ron started with 43 books. So 43 must be my value for S. Now that I know two values, I can solve for E. Since I'm missing a small number, I need to subtract 43 minus 12. E equals 31, so Ron ended up with 31 books.